And can you tell me what war you served in and what branch of the service?
I was in the Pacific Theater, South Pacific, and I was in the 2nd Brigade of the EBSNR. They call it Engineer Boat and Shore Regiment, which is an amphibious landing craft.
What was your rank when you were discharged?
Sergeant. It's a technician's 4th grade, actually, with a sergeant's rating.
Ed, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living at 6 Railroad Place in Wethersfield, Connecticut.
Do you remember the date you were drafted?
Let's see, I think it was in June, in June 42, I think it was around the 24th.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Yes. We were taken from Asylum Street in East Hartford, where they put us on a train to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And most of us were sick. I don't know if it was homesick or lack of food. But it took us quite a while to get there. It was an all-day thing, being away from home.
And is Fort Devens where you did your basic training?
No, that was the jumping off spot. Fort Devens was the induction center.
How long did you stay at Fort Devens?
Not more than 2 or 3 days, and then they sent us to basic training in Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Can you tell me what your basic training was like?
It was, as far as I remember, I think it was 8 weeks of just regular basic training, getting into condition, infantry training, and exercise.
Do you remember any of your instructors from basic?
In basic? No, nothing special happened really. It was July and August. It was very, very hot there. But just regular training, rifle, infantry training.
What were the living conditions like at the basic training camp?
Living conditions, very good. Excellent, I thought. Food was great. Really trying to get us in condition.
Where did you go after your 8 weeks of basic training?
Then they sent 90% of us to Camp Edwards, Massachusetts.
And what did you do there?
Well, they formed the 2nd Brigade there, amphibious. Which would consist of landing craft, shipped ashore.
Can you tell me about that 2nd Brigade? Because this is the first time it came into being, correct?
Yes, it was a new organization. And from Camp Edwards, which is in Falmouth, Mass., they sent us to Washburn Island, where we had training on LCVP, landing craft. And we had training from Washburn Island. We used to land infantry on Martha's Vineyard for training. So that's where I had my training.
And you were being trained specifically to operate these landing craft?
Yes.
And this is the first time the Army had landing craft?
First time I've ever been on a boat.
Really? That must have been pretty exciting.
But they come and told us that, hey, we're putting you on a landing craft, so we're going to make you a coxswain. That's the driver. I said, okay, I've never on a boat before. I said, well, we'll show you how to do it.
How did they choose you?
How did I do?
How did they choose you? Why did they?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. They just came in our tent one night and said, Mr. Gilbert, you're a coxswain, and Mr. So-and-so, you're your engineer. We had a crew of 3, a coxswain, an engineer, and a seaman.
And the coxswain was the driver, that was you. What did the engineer do?
He was supposed to take care of the motor, engine, and the seaman, he was take care of the ropes and the ramp and such. So we had a lot of training there, and we went from there to Florida in the Gulf. We had no training there because we didn't have any boats and no camp. We just slept on the beach for a couple of weeks, and they'd send us to Fort Ord, California.
And what did you do
And
there?
well, we started training at Monterey, but that wasn't too good either. The surf was so high at Monterey that we couldn't operate the boats.
Really?
It was just sweep us away. So then he decided to they sent us overseas to Cairns. I think it's Cairns, K-A-R-I-N-S, Cairns, Australia. Australia. So they sent our whole outfit to Australia for training, and that's where we got our best training. In fact, in Cairns is where they built our boats, our LCVP, the small one.
LCVP?
Yeah.
They built them right there?
They built
and then
them
you trained on those boats in Australia?
In Cairns, yeah.
How did you like being a seaman after being on the land all your life?
Well, I thought I got to like it after a while. I did particularly care about the boat, but we did pretty good. Because most everybody that never had too much experience. There was a few old salts from been on boats, but most of us were strangers. So when we got through training in Australia, oh, by the way, it took us from San Francisco, it took us 30 days to get to Australia on a troop ship. There were 3,000 of us. And we're all by ourselves, no escorts, nothing. It took us 30 days.
Were there any incidents on the way over?
On the way over.
Wow. What did you do on the boat for 30 days?
Not much of anything. Just hoping to get off. You know,
Get seasick?
too many people got sick, and you wake up every morning, there's more water, and more water. But no, they exercise a little bit and give us 2 meals a day, and that's it. Tried to sleep.
After your training in Australia, where did you go?
Well, then we went into our first combat. We drove our boats, our own boats, from Cairns to New Guinea. It was pretty close because the Japanese were getting pretty close to Australia at that time. So our outfit took on the east coast, that would be the east coast, and our first mission was at Lae, L-A-E, Lae, New Guinea. We made a landing there. Wasn't too much resistance, but a little bit. But it was our first combat affair, kind of upset us a little bit there. And then
How big a group of boats would go for this kind of a landing? How many landing craft were in your group?
You know, I don't remember how many boats were in our company, but the whole company was there.
So is that like 20 or 200?
Oh, no, I would say more like 20, yeah. And we took the infantry in, and then we went right up the New Guinea coast to Finch Haven, Hollandia, and a few I don't remember. The last one was Hollandia. But another thing that was interesting, in New Guinea, We were attached to the Australian 9th Division infantry. So that's who we worked with in New Guinea. Not the American, it was Australian 9th Division.
So your commander was an Australian?
Well, no. Actually, MacArthur was my commander, but we had to take the Australians. They had no amphibious operations there.
Ed, can you explain, for those that might view this tape, exactly what landing craft's job is? What's the purpose of a landing craft? What kind of jobs do you do?
Well, they had to get to these beaches somehow, so our boats were, we had so many infantry or equipment or whatever you want, we had to bring it to the beach. And we picked up the infantry or equipment from a large Navy boat out about maybe a mile or two, and then we brought it to the beach. It was like a transport to the beach. So that's the only way that men could get to these islands.
And a note for the record, there in Ed's file there is an article about landing craft. And what was the nickname for them? Sea taxis? Or water taxis? What was the nickname for the landing craft?
What was the name of it?
The nickname.
Oh, someone would call us the Mighty Midgets, and let's see what else they call it. Taxi. And the Australians, they called us a lot of things. They were a great group to work with. Very, very tough soldiers.
Really? After your first combat at Ley, where did you go from there?
Up the coast of New Guinea. Finch Haven was the second one. And little ports all the way up. I don't remember the names of them, but the last one was Hollandia. They were getting larger as we went along.
What time frame was this? Was this still 1942?
42. No, this was, no, that was 43. Because we went to Australia in January 43.
Okay.
And Finch Haven, it was a malaria-infested place. And that's where I got malaria the first time.
So you caught malaria at Finch Haven?
Yeah, I wound up in the field hospital for a few days, you know. And as soon as I could stand up, they told me to go back to duty again.
Have you had recurring bouts of malaria since then?
Again? Yes. Not while I was in the service. If I did, I wouldn't tell anybody. But after I came home, I had a few, and I wound up in the Newington Veterans Hospital for 10 days. And they compensated me for a few months after that, and then for maybe a year. Then I went in one day and they told me I was all better. They cut off my.
Wow.
But I think it came back a few times, but not too noticeable. Just went away again. You know? And over there in the Pacific, the quinine was the main medicine but we didn't have any because the Japanese stole it all. So they had to give us an Ativan, they call it Ativan tablet, to compensate for it. You know. We had to take one a day. Of course, half of us turned yellow when taking that little pill. But I guess it did the job.
Well, it did the job for some of them, but not you. If you caught malaria, or did you take the pill later? Does that help you even after you've caught malaria once?
They started giving us the pill as soon as we got over there, even before we got there.
Oh.
And some of the fellows in the company, they got malaria so bad that they had to send them home. We got a real good case in.
After Hollandia, where did you go?
And then we went to the Philippines. And a few small places, but I would say the largest one was the Battle of Lady Gulf, landing at Lady. There was, oh my gosh, I think there was hundreds and thousands of ships, Navy, Army, everybody, Air Corps. It was a big day.
And your unit was involved in that landing?
Oh yes.
Can you
First
describe
day.
that day for me?
Yeah, it was a little exciting. You'd see all those Navy ships and Army and Air Corps. It was quite noisy. Like, you know, hundreds of airplanes up in the air and they're bombing the beach and the Japanese. I had a little problem of my own, and probably nobody even knows. The Japanese, before we got there, evidently they knew we were coming, and they had been, what we just say, practicing. You know, they were in the hills, dug in, and they would shoot out onto the bay, you know. So they had these markers on the bay. We didn't realize what they were. We thought they were just sticks or something. You know? So when we would hit a certain part of the, maybe so many yards out on coming in, they would start shooting. Yeah? So we were right in the middle of all those shells landing. Of course, the Navy was shooting over our heads at them. It got kind of noisy. And I personally, they had other things. They had things in the water that would get, I caught a piece of rope in my propeller and stopped the boat. So we had to go in the water with a knife and cut the rope off. You know, nobody, I don't think ever knew that happened. I never said anything, but so we got in the boat and took off to the beach.
Got in the water and cut the rope off. You and the other guy in the boat?
Oh yeah, we take turns, you know.
Oh my gosh! So then you just resumed action?
Yeah, resumed the beach and unloaded whatever we had on there, and then go back out to the Navy Liberty ships and get another load or equipment or jeeps, material or personnel, whatever.
Wow.
And we had a few casualties, but not an awful lot. I don't think our outfit, we never had too many casualties really, battle-wise.
Oh. Did you have casualties otherwise?
Accidents?
Well,
yeah, people getting hurt or drowning or whatever.
Could you swim?
Did I swim?
Do you know how to swim?
Oh yes, yeah. But a lot of them didn't know how. A lot of them are from down south, and they didn't know. We had everybody, I think, from every state in the Union in our outfit. Most of them from New York, New Jersey, but we had some from Louisiana and places.
Where did you go after the Battle of Lady?
We stayed there quite a while, servicing, like you say, taxi back ship to shore or different little islands that I cannot remember the names of them. But then they came up with a new one. We had the second one was Mindoro. Not Mindanao, it's Mindoro. And how we got there from Lady, not under our own power, but we were towed by Navy LST landing craft. That was an LST. My little boat was a LCM. That was I think that was the largest the Army had. It was 56 feet long.
Your boat was
Yeah,
56
and
feet
I think it
long?
weighed 26 tons, something like that. And we could carry probably 100 men or a Sherman tank or something like that. But mostly all small stuff. And we were towed by a LST, and that was a Navy landing ship. And they were like 300 feet long. Or something. And that was a trip, being towed all night by the, oh.
You stay in your boat while it's getting towed?
It was a rough ride all night. So the next morning at dawn, we landed on the beach in Mindoro. It got kind of rough there. To me personally, it was worse than the Leyte, personally. You know. We come pretty close to a lot of action there, and that was the first opportunity. The first we had the action against the kamikaze pilots.
So this was the first kamikaze you had?
Yeah, we had a little trouble with them. And in fact, something happened to me there that I never said anything about, or nobody witnessed. Well, it was quite a bit, and it was a LST on the beach. And I was coming in between two LSTs, maybe 300 feet off the beach, 400 feet, and the kamikaze plane hit that LST on the deck. You know, he just swiped the deck with that thing and knocked quite a few sailors in the water, you know. And I picked up 21 sailors or people out of the water. They were burning or hurt very bad. Some of them were burnt quite bad from the fire. And we put them on our boat and took them ashore, or it's a hospital ship or something like that. You know. But that's the last I heard of that. Most of them were sailors that we picked out of the water. And then after the landing, they set up our camp there. We stayed there quite a while in Mindoro, doing jobs like you say, ship to shore, unloading ships. We did a lot of that, unloading.
How long would you say that you stayed at Mindoro?
In Mindoro?
Are you saying talking weeks or months?
Oh no, we stayed longer. Yeah, I don't know, just offhand, I would say 2 or 3 months. Oh. And even our camp setup, we still had trouble with kamikazes. I guess they knew we were there, and they kept bugging us, you know. And one incident, we were doing some errands, like you say, and it was a Liberty ship. We were to unload it. And it was ammunition, and before we got, and it was about maybe 2 miles from our camp, and we were going there on our way. Other fellows in the company to unload this thing, and it was quite a ways away. And the kamikazes came, and one of them hit this boat, the Liberty ship. And they had the hatches open to unload, and they went right down the hatch. And that ship blew in about 100,000 pieces.
Oh, I can imagine with all that ammunition on it.
And we were close enough to it that it knocked all my crew down on the boat. I didn't even hurt too bad, but because I was in my little cubby hole where the wheel was, you know, a steel protection. But it knocked the other fellas down, the concussion. We were that close, and I would say we're half a mile.
Did you see the huge explosion and the ship flying apart?
We saw it, and but then after we got up and woke up, and there was nothing there, nothing. That's how much it blew. So in Mindoro, that's what we did. We errands and unloaded ships.
Now, what was your rank at this time?
Sergeant.
You had already been, when were you promoted to sergeant?
The first day I got to Massachusetts, before I even got on the boat.
Oh, really? So becoming the driver of the boat got you
yeah, and I have no idea why they, well, I don't know why they put me in the outfit. I guess they took the whole outfit just to train them, because all I had on my my record was that I lived near the Connecticut River and the Wethersfield Yacht Club, and it was only about a half a mile away. So I guess maybe they made me a.
They thought you might know something about.
Yeah, yeah.
So you were a sergeant. That made you an officer.
Non-com, non-commissioned officer.
And as a non-com officer, what would your duties be? Did you only have the 2 men on your boat that you had to supervise?
No, I didn't. I was in charge of the boat. That was my.
Just your one boat. That's all you.
That was my boat.
So that was your responsibility.
And I was responsible for my crew. And Navy had some LCMs, but it was a little different. Navy LCMs were stationed on their mothership. When they made a landing, I guess they designated somebody to take the boat, you know, and when they were through, they put it back on the boat. But our outfit, we lived on these boats.
Did you keep the same boat the entire
I kept
time?
the same boat. That was my boat.
Did it have a name?
Not really, no.
Did it have a number?
Well, if I can remember, it was 425.
Did you have the same crew the entire time?
Most of the time. Once in a while, some of the crew, they either got sick or something, and they sent me a replacement. You know, and the replacements were all, you know, 18, 19 years old, and some of them couldn't swim. I had a seaman from out west there, a nice, good seaman, but he couldn't swim. And many times I had to dish him out of the water. He fell overboard.
That must be pretty scary.
Yeah, it was scary.
To be in the water.
Now it's kind of comical. You know, it's funny things that happen,
Yeah.
but then it was kind of scary. You know.
When you started out and you left the United States, did you leave with your crew that you trained with at Falmouth? Or when did you first pick up your crew?
Oh, no, I picked up the crew in Australia.
All right, where did you go after Mindoro?
Well, actually, that's where we stayed, but they did send me, they picked 4 of our boats to go on a special mission, and that's what our outfit was all about, you know. If they had something to do on some outpost island somewhere, they'd send just a few of us. Even though we didn't know where they went, you know, we were all like, everything was secret. Well, they sent 4 of us. We went to Romblon Island. It was a small island. And we went there on our own, and we left in the middle of the night, and nobody, to this day, I've been to reunions, and the people in our company, even the officers, I asked them about this, and they didn't even know that I was gone.
Really? Did you know what your special mission was?
No. No, and they...
Did you ever find out?
Oh, yes. I found out. The next morning I found out. We went to Romblon Island with 4 boats, and we had Filipino, infantry on each boat. And it was an actual combat landing. We didn't know it until we got there. And we landed at about a mile from the center of Rambla, 2 miles up the beach. We let these infantry off at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was dark, and we didn't know what was there, or all they told us that if somebody was there, they would have a light, it would direct us to the beach. Well, we had one officer, that's all, a lieutenant. And he told me, you know, watch out for, there's a light, somebody's got a light there. But evidently, they never showed up. So in the dark, we just took a chance, but what we saw was the moon shining on a tin roof on the beach. We took that for the light, you know. So we all landed and got the infantry off there, and then backed off the beach, and we heard a lot of shooting, so evidently somebody was there. Poor infantry was, those guys were great. And the Filipinos, a few got killed. What they landed there, the reason they landed there was they were going to, it was about, I think, 2 miles from town, which was nothing but a bunch of grass huts in the town hall. They were going to encircle the town. And I found out later that there were Japanese in the town hall, and these Filipino infantry surprised them entirely. They didn't even know they were there. They had quite a battle there. Not much, the Japanese just either ran or was killed. And then after we landed, we went back to the town where they had a dock, and that's where we stayed. And we stayed there 45 days. We're on our own. And while we were there, like you say, we were doing duties. We ran from these little islands, each island, to pick up people that were living there hiding from the Japanese, to bring them back home, wherever their island was. And we did that for all the time we were there. And we picked up quite a few people. And we picked up one family, a whole boatload. One family lived in Ramblam. They had a home there. Evidently they were business people. They were Spanish, very tall, Spanish, spoke English excellent, but they've been hiding all this time. And I think they were the owners or managers of some plantation. So we picked those up. They were very nice to us. Brought them back to town, and that's where we stayed at that dock doing errands for 45 days. So it was quite a, actually it was a rest, you know.
Well, those people must have been very grateful to get picked up.
Oh yeah, I mean it was quiet. It's not warlike, you know. We were just doing our duty.
Wow. Where did you go after your 45 days?
Well, when we went back to Mindoro. Oh, in Ramblan, you want to hear? There was a funny thing happened to me.
Yes, I want to hear.
My boat, I had my landing craft backed into the dock, and I had a mirror hanging on my cockpit there, and I was shaving, you know. And it was warm, so all I had was shorts on. And I was shaving, and there was on the shore, which was only about maybe 150 feet, there was a warehouse. And then these people's home were on the other side. And I was shaving, and I looked in the mirror, and I saw this person. He come out of they opened the door. You know, I thought it was one of our. I looked again, and he looked at me, and it was a Japanese soldier. See, but he didn't have a gun or anything. So, and So we both recognized each other at the same time. I don't know who was scared, you know. And I dropped the razor. He ran. He ran up in the woods, and there was a bunch of Filipino infantry sitting around and resting on a dock. And I hollered to him. I said, "The Japanese come out in the warehouse." And so they took off after him. I don't know what happened, but
Wow, that was a surprise. Huh?
well, it was a surprise. But and after it happened, I said, "You know, this guy, he could have had a gun or something. All I had was a razor."
You're not going to do much damage to him. Oh my heavens. And then you went back to Mindoro?
So what happened, back to Mindoro, and my company had gone. There was nothing there, just the island. And they told me that where they had gone, and I think, and they told me that I was to leave the ship because I had orders to go home. I said, well, how come? What happened? What did I do wrong? But there was another boy in my outfit, and him and I were sent home because my brother died in the Pacific. He got killed. He was a radio gunner on a B-24 bomber, and then he got shot down. And he was only overseas 2 months when he got killed. And I've been over there for almost 2 years. And the other boy, he had 2 brothers killed in Europe. So they picked us 2 to go home.
Do you know what that date was?
No, I don't, but it was around, I would say June of 1945.
So then you...
But my orders, the understanding was that I would go home for some certain days, and my orders was to come back. But while I was home, the war ended, so that was the end of that. I went back to Camp Devens, and they sent me to Durham, North Carolina, to a camp. And then they kept me there until they discharged me.
So what was the camp in Durham, North Carolina?
What was the camp? I'll think of it.
When you think of it, let me know. Otherwise, I'll look it up on your discharge.
Okay.
And you were discharged.
I was discharged from there, and while I was there, my own outfit, I understand, was disbanded, so they didn't know what to do with me. And before they give me discharge, they put me in the medic and kept in that camp. So I still held my sergeant's rating, and they gave me a private room in the barracks, and I was in charge of the barracks.
Were you a good officer?
And it was a camp for the soldiers that had come back were from overseas with battle fatigue and nervousness and all that. And so I was sort of in charge. We'd try to help them or take them for a walk during the day or something like that. But then that's where I was discharged from the medical center.
Can you remember any of the memorable experiences while you were overseas?
Well, only those 2 that I mentioned about the Mindoro and people. My poor engineer almost drowned a couple of times. Oh, and it was nice being on the water because we used to let our ramp down. We used to go swimming. And then, of course, it was against the rules that we used to throw a hand grenade in the water to catch fish, you know. It would stun the fish, and then we could just pick them out of the water, you know. because food was pretty scarce.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Not that I know of. I think the unit as a whole was.
And you were awarded a good conduct medal, and you were awarded something about the Asiatic Pacific with
Yes.
Battlestar and Arrowhead. I
Right.
saw that.
And don't forget the good conduct medal.
That's cool. As an officer, non-com officer, were you ever involved with any battle planning?
No, no.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about living conditions and life in the military. How did you stay in touch with your family while you were overseas?
Mail. What was the type of mail they had? They'd photograph your letter, send it home.
V-mail?
V-mail. And of course it was censored. Half of it was cut out. But the mail coming in was pretty good. But living conditions in the Pacific was not too good, especially New Guinea.
In what ways? Can you tell me a little bit?
Well, it was quite hot, dirty. You could just once you got off the beach, you just stand there and perspire, and it was very, very hot, very. And I think they only had 2 seasons over there. It was hot and rainy, and when it rained, boy, it was just mud. So you can see what these infantrymen went through after we let them off. We could just back out where they had to breeze out in the ocean.
What was the food like?
Mostly rations, K rations, in a package. You get powdered milk, powdered coffee, and powdered everything, and three cigarettes and a chocolate bar. And once in a while, we would stay in one place long enough that they would set a camp up for us, so we could sleep in a tent, and then we'd eat on. They cooked some mutton or some mashed potato or some darn thing.
Did you sleep on your boat? When
Oh yes, yeah, we lived on the boat.
Did you have plenty of supplies and other things that you needed?
Just what we had, but I don't think there was too many. like equipment for the boat or parts for the boat. For some reason or other, sometimes it was hard to get. You know, we'd have to they'd have to do our own repairs. Not us, but we had a maintenance outfit that would do the repairs. But food, you know. And of course the water was not too good. They put the chlorine in the water. Oh boy, it was. And then of course they'd hang it in a Lister bag on a tree, you know, and it would get pretty hot. You know. So we had to drink that. And oh, another thing interesting in Finch Haven, I'm pretty sure that we had to. There's one of those islands. We found out we couldn't drink the water because there was a nice brook and waterfall where we camped, but the Japanese had thrown their dead soldiers in there and poisoned the water. And so that is where I think I had my first glass of beer. It was Japanese beer that they had captured. There was no water to drink, so I had to drink the beer. I really didn't like it, but I had to drink something. And that's where That was where our first casualty. We lost a southern boy, not from combat, but he was standing on the back of the landing craft, and you have a anchor line. It was rolled up on the back of the landing craft. Well, he had his foot in the middle of the rope, and he threw the anchor over, and then he went with the anchor. And they couldn't get him in time or find him with the current and stuff, that we lost him. That was our first.
A note at this point that, Ed, didn't you tell me when you came home you weighed 125
I weighed
pounds?
125 pounds.
So I guess that tells us what the food was like.
And I was home, like home in October. In November, the first week in November, I wound up in the Newington Veterans Hospital with another reoccurrence of malaria.
Did you feel pressure or stress when you were in the military?
Truthfully, I don't think so. I was a little homesick, but not bad.
Was there anything special that you did for good luck?
No. No rabbit, no.
No, nothing like that?
No.
Did you do anything for entertainment?
We had very little. They talked about all these shows overseas, but I don't ever remember. Maybe we moved around so much we didn't see any. We had movies once in a while.
You never got to see Bob Hope or any of the USO shows?
No, I don't know where Bob Hope was. I don't think he ever went to New Guinea.
I don't think either. I think you're a man.
No, never saw him. No, we had movies. That's about all. And sometimes in the we were on the beach. We had a camp set up. They'd have the camera set up in the jungle, and every once in a while we get interrupted with. Do you ever hear anybody talk about Washing Machine Charlie?
No.
Well, that was a Japanese flyer. It was an airplane. They'd come around at night just to annoy you, you know. So sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and here he is buzzing and buzzing. Sometimes he'd drop a bomb, but he didn't know where he was dropping it.
Was it the same guy?
Yeah, it was something to annoy you, get the fellas on edge, you know. And it not only happened to us, but it happened to a lot of people over there. They call him Washing Machine Charlie.
Did it work? Would that get you on edge?
Some of the fellas, well, we'd have to, if we're having movies, we'd have to stop and run, hide in the foxhole, and then he'd go away, we go back to the movies.
And that was it for entertainment?
That was it.
Did you get any leave while you were overseas, or you had to stay there the whole time?
No leaves. Never got a leave. And I don't know whether that was, I heard of people going to Australia for a rest, but I don't ever remember our outfit doing anything like that.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
You know, I can't remember. I know there was many, but
Did you guys play jokes on each other?
all the time. Oh, well, this wasn't a joke, but when we were in Cairns, we had a camp set up where we were training our boats, and we came back from training one day in our tent, in the sergeant's tent. The top sergeant, I don't know whether somebody did it on purpose or not, but there was a 16-foot python snake in his bunk. So we never found out whether somebody did it on purpose or not. But so they had to kill the snake. There's a lot of snakes.
Wow. Ed, do you have any photographs? Pictures?
From over there?
Yeah.
I have a few at home, but I didn't bring them with me yet.
Well, maybe I can get copies of them. I'll make copies if you let me borrow them.
I don't think there's anything, well, you know, it's a picture just of the fellas. You might be
Any
interested.
pictures of yourself?
Yeah,
I know.
I'm in the picture, yeah.
Good.
Oh, going back to Ramblan,
Yeah.
I told you we met this Spanish family, very nice. There was, two brothers, 2 sisters, and a sister-in-law. Very nice family. And after the war was over, I corresponded with them for, they used to send me Christmas cards and different things.
From where? Did they go to Spain?
They lived in Manila. That was
where
with
they
it.
stayed?
Yeah, but there's whatever the summer home or whatever you want to call it was on Ramblan. I don't know how far it was from Manila, but it was quite a ways. And they, another thing might have been interesting, being so far out there, I guess they had to order their clothes, you know. And this family, they dressed just like they did in New York. Because the Filipino families, they in the grass hut, they were different. They used to order their clothes from Montgomery Ward. And, you know, once a year or whatever time the boat came back with their supplies, and that's where they got their, but they're very nice family. And like I say, I got Christmas cards and stuff from them for a few years after the war.
Well, that was nice. What did you think of your fellow officers and fellow soldiers?
I never had any complaints about any of them, actually.
Did you form any close friendships?
Oh yeah, with my crew. The officers, I don't know if I mentioned it, we had, after I got out of the service, we had 25 reunions every year, and the last reunion was 1997. And every year we'd have a reunion in a different city. We went to New Orleans, we went to Virginia, we went to Chicago. But 3 or 4 times we went back to Falmouth, Mass, where we organized. We went back to our, and in fact at Camp Edwards, they took us through Camp Edwards and showed us our old barracks.
Does it look the same?
Yeah, no, they're pretty well run down.
Oh.
Yeah, they don't use them anymore. So.
Did you attend all 25 reunions?
22.
Wow,
22 of
that's
them.
a lot.
Yeah.
You made most of them.
And the ones that we had in Falmouth, my wife and I were in charge because we lived so close. So we were in charge getting our hotel and motel. And they were nice to us up there. They took us, they gave us a bus, took us on tours through the camp, and we went back to Washburn Island, but we couldn't go out there because there was a bridge when we were there, but it had washed away, so they said they don't use it anymore. And evidently the town of Massachusetts rented the island to the Army during the war. So after the war, the Army left, and it's the same, they won't change it. It's just the same as it was.
Do people live there?
No.
Nothing.
No. And after we left, we had tents. After we left, another, I think it was a 534th or 592nd moved in there, and they built barracks. And after they left, then they there's nobody. But I've been there a couple of times, but I couldn't get on the island. Nobody would take me over there. But I understand there was broken down old barracks over there, but nobody over there. No tours or nothing. So we're still trying to get over there, but like, even I went to the town, and they said you'd have to hire a boat.
If somebody, could a regular person, if somebody had a boat, they could take
They
you
could
over?
probably take you over there. Yeah. But we had a good time in Falmouth, and our our commanding officer lived in Massachusetts. He showed up at our reunion, Captain Harris.
Did you stay in touch with your crew after the war?
For a short time, and then I found out through reunions that they came to me, but all the crew that I had, they all passed away.
They have?
They're all gone.
You're the last one? Wow.
I must have had, well, I had three crew, regular crew, and then during any combat or landing, they would give you a couple extra men. And then they jump from boat to boat. But my regular crew, they're gone.
Did any of them live close enough that you could see each
Yes,
other after the war?
my engineer lived in New York.
So did you get together after the war?
Just once. And then after that, it was shortly after that he passed away. So he didn't show up at any reunions anymore.
Do you remember his name?
No. Do I remember his name? Yes. Alex Yushevsky. And the fellow that was in charge of all this reunion lived in New Jersey. And in fact, his name was Connors, and he worked for the Veterans Administration in New Jersey. So that's where he got all his information to start this thing rolling. He knew where everybody was and the names, and so he did a good job. And then, but 2 years ago, he got very ill, so he said he couldn't do it anymore. So we stopped in 1997.
And you don't think there'll be any more reunions?
I doubt very much.
Do you recall the day your service ended, when you were actually discharged?
Yeah, I was in
You were in North Carolina.
North Carolina. And so they told me I was going home, and they gave me $300 and put me on a train. And I had to stand up all the way to Connecticut. And there wasn't much. The train was loaded, but there wasn't too many interesting things going on.
Was it all troops that were on the train, or
Mostly troops. And
the war
when
was over at that point?
yes, yeah. The war ended when I came back. I went to Camp Devens. Going back, they sent from me there to Washington, Camp Belvoir in Washington. For any reason, there was transportation. We still only stayed there like 3 or 4 days, and that's when the war ended. And then they sent me down to North Carolina. Why, I don't know. They didn't charge me. They didn't discharge me from Camp Belvoir.
Where were you when you heard that the war ended?
I was in a restaurant in Washington somewhere. I can't quite remember what kind of restaurant it was, but it was sort of a bar thing. Bar, and place was full of smoke, and all of a sudden the war ended, you know, and it was a big celebration. So that made us late getting back to camp.
Did you get in trouble?
Actually, no. We had to. We were on a bus going back, and some of the fellows got sick, so we had to get off the bus and walk. And so it was quite a ways. And here comes a Jeep with 2 officers in it. Uh-oh. So they gave us a ride back to camp. Never said a word.
Well, the war was over. They were probably.
Yeah, they didn't care. They want to go home.
What did you do immediately after the war when you got back to Connecticut?
Well, let's see. I really didn't do much of anything on the. I was quite sick with that malaria, and then of course I had to go look for a job. And I worked in before the war, 1940. I worked at Colt's Manufacturing on the 50 caliber machine guns, and of course they had this old story was, you go in the service, your job will be here when it comes back. But when I come back, the plant was closed, so no job.
So what did you do for work?
I went to work at in a retail lumber company.
Where?
In Hartford, Connecticut. And it was an old outfit which is not there anymore. They went out of business in 1966. I worked there 20 years.
What was the name of it?
Edwin Taylor Lumber Company. And it was an old company, been there for years and years and years.
You worked there for 21 years?
20 years. And then when they closed, I went to work for a new lumber company that just originated. It was General Building Supply in East Hartford. And in fact, they only been open a few years, so I went to work there, and I was there 20 years. So it was 40 years I was piling up lumber.
Wow. What was your job at the lumber company?
I was sort of I was in charge of trim work, windows, doors, and deliveries.
Did you join any veterans organization?
American Legion. American Legion Post 23, Weathersfield.
Post 23?
23.
When did you join? Right after the war?
1947, 8. I've been there 55 years.
Oh my.
I remember.
And do you still attend meetings and everything?
Every month.
What are some of the activities that your American Legion post gets involved with?
Boys Town, Girls Town, baseball, American Legion baseball.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about military in general?
Yeah, I talk about it once in a while, but World War II was so different than today, I was so anxious to get into it. I'm not sure they are today, although I think they're much better trained than we were now. We are a well-trained military. Of course, they took us off in World War II. None of us had any war experience. We just took us out of the grocery stores and everywhere and put us in the army. Give us a gun. The Japanese and the Germans were well-trained, like our army is now.
How do you think that your service affected your life?
I don't know. Seems like, I don't know, I think I was the same. I don't think it upset me too much. But when I was discharged, I was so anxious. Boy, wow. And they give you an opportunity to sign up when you get discharged to go home and have a little rest. And if you wanted to come back, you could. I said, no, not me. Well, I don't want no part of it. But then years after, I thought, something. It might have been a good idea if I stayed in and made a career of it. But when they told me that there was no more amphibious craft, then I said, well, what could I do? But then eventually they reformed it. Now they have a 532nd in California. And they have reunions. Of course, they have craft, but they don't have the landing craft we had. Now they got real fancy ones,
You think you could drive a landing craft again?
Today?
Yeah.
I don't know, by the looks of them, I don't know.
Would you drive your old one if you got it back today?
I think I could. I bet I could. I like that boat. I got to like it. And I was kind of proud that I could pass the training on those. It was especially the little LCV. It was hard to back those things up and land them and get off the beach. Sometimes you get stuck on the beach. Well, going back to experience, and I keep thinking of these things. In Romblon, 2 of our landing craft went to a distant island to pick up some resident Filipinos that have been stuck on there for a couple of years, to bring them back. So we landed on the beach and some rocks and stuff, and so we got the people on. It had an awful time getting them on it. They're slow. Oh my gosh! You'd get them both on the boat, tell them we're going to take them home, and the other fellow got off the beach, and in the meantime, here I'm waiting and chewing my fingers. The tide goes out, see? And there I am, stuck. So the other boat tried to threw me a rope, tried to pull me off, no way. So we had to stay there until the tide came in, which was in the middle of the night, and pretty scary because we didn't know what was on the beach. And then people got real scared because they were sitting in my boat, and we had to look out for anything that it may be Japanese or somebody. So all we had was our 3 guns on the boat. We had 3 .50 caliber machine guns. So I told our crew to be ready for something because we can't get off here. So we had to wait. And when the tide came off, he finally pulled me off, and we went.
That other boat waited for you, though?
Oh yes.
Would he wait out in the?
He waited out in the, yeah. So we were lucky, and so we got the people back to where they belonged. That's what our outfit did, which actually nobody knows what we did. We taxied, different islands. They were dangerous, and some of them were dangerous, some were not. But then, like I say, very few people knew that we were Army. Everything was Navy. We were on the water. We were Navy.
Now, you told me earlier that when you got out of the service, you were out of the service for 6 months and you got married?
Yep. Yeah. Yes, I came home in October of '45 and I got married in June of '46.
And you just celebrated which anniversary?
58.
And did you have children?
2 daughters.
2 dogs?
2 daughters.
2 daughters?
Yeah, 2 daughters.
Well, Ed, I'd like to thank you for coming today and telling me your story. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered? Any other things that you can think of?
I don't think so. Only about my wife is still working. She won't quit, and she works for White Publishing, and she's in advertising. She sells ads for a local newspaper. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Newington Life, Weathersfield Life, Rocky Hill Life. I think they have 40 towns, but she works just Weathersfield. And she works a couple of weeks and then she rests, but she won't quit. And my youngest daughter works for the Connecticut Humane Society. She's been there 23 years. She loves animals, but not children. And my other daughter works for the state, and she's got 2 boys.
How would you feel about seeing your grandchildren go into the military?
I think it would be up to them. Personally, I don't think it would bother me too much. If I thought they would like it, or is that what they wanted to do? And I had 2 brothers, but only one in the service, because we lost him. And he died 2 months before his 21st birthday.
Where were you when you heard about your brother?
I was in, let's see, where was I? I think I was in Leyte, in the Philippines. I'd already been overseas a couple of years. And he was stationed at Waukee Island. And I think some of our boats eventually got to Waukee Island, but I never got that far.
Had you been in touch with your brother since you had gone overseas?
In the service?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, when he died, for some reason, I received some of his belongings. I don't know why. And they sent me a stack of letters about that high. And evidently he must have had the letters. Instead of sending them home, I got them. I don't know. And the bunch of letters on there said that he had died. So actually I knew it before my parents did.
Really?
But I never understood why I got the letters instead of my parents. And another thing, I lost the letters in Leyte, and that was another bad experience, come to think of it. They had a typhoon, a real bad typhoon, and the Navy lost a lot of ships. They were way out to sea, but we were in a bay, and it was so strong that it ripped the top of we had a canvas on top of it, ripped that off, and we were tied to a dock. It broke the ropes, so we had to win the bay and keep our motors going full blast into the wind so it wouldn't tip us over, and I lost everything. I lost everything except my rifle. My mail, my clothes, everything just blew right off. So the typhoon is funny. After a while it settled down and got quiet. And we're just getting relaxed, and it turned around and come back the other way. Blew again. We didn't lose any men, but it was scary.
So all your brother's letters flew away?
Everything, I lost everything. And I had them in a box, and I had them in my pilot house. And somehow or other they got blew out of there. But I held on to my rifle. But you had to hold on, and then I had to hold on to the wheel too. Otherwise it'd blow you overboard.
Have you driven a boat at all since you got out of the service?
A few friends. My My wife has a cousin in Stonington, and he has a boat tied up to his back door once in a while, but otherwise, I often wonder why I didn't get interested in it.
Right, I wonder, you never bought a boat or was interested in owning one?
Yeah. No, I was more interested in, I don't know, I was more interested in hobbies, home. It just got away from it all. So I turned out to be a good woodworker, and working in for a lumber yard, I got interested in wood and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Ed. Any last stories you want to add?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you for your time.
Very good.